So welcome back to our panel. Hope you had a good coffee and tasty tea or some cake as well, or some fruit. And while people are taking their seats, we can slowly start. I welcome Kateřina here as well. She is going to follow up the online participants of our conference. So I would like also to challenge them to comment on what they hear. They can either type it to chat or they can just raise their hand and say what they have on their hearts themselves online. But we have a dear guest here on my right, apart from Inaki, who definitely raised several questions in your heads. We have 4 others. It's Ladislav Lábus representing the host institution here. Welcome, Ladislav. Paola Vigano from Italy. Welcome, Paola. Johan de Walshe from Belgium. Welcome. And not to forget students or fresh graduates and their voice. I warmly also welcome Vojtěch Ruderfer, who will later share with us the results of a students' workshop, which was preceding our conference, but were also several discussions held while we were sitting in this room. So the students were meeting upstairs and discussing the same topics, same 3 themes as we do and we did. So back to Universality of Architectural Education. Now I would warmly again welcome Ladislav Lábus and introduce him shortly to you. So Ladislav is currently serving as a dean of this faculty for already 7 years. It's his second round, but as far as I remember, he started here in 1990, the same year as I did as a student. He's an active architect too. He's well known in the Czech architectural scene, especially for his approach to the reconstructions and refurbishments of buildings in the historical context, as well as for his work in the residential area. In 2013, he gained a prestigious award by the American Institute of Architects, the Honorary Fellowship. So that's just to name a few aspects of Ladislav life, and now I would like to invite him for his 5 minutes of provocations or notes. So the floor is yours.
No provocation. Thank you very much for your introduction, and I am not a provocateur, but I would like to say a few words about our topics, which is universality in the education of architects, and if we give such topics on the table, it is that in this time, in present days, we see that there are the problems which we discuss here on second day, that the enlargement of the project and plans and the overlapping of discipline, and especially the enlargement of the field of necessary knowledge and skills which must know the graduate architects in the practice. It's start be a problem, and we must again discuss if it is in the future sustainable to found the education of architects on the universality. So when we put together all these 3 elements which we spoke here, I think maybe the result is that it's not necessary, it is even most necessary in the future. yes, because it will be more complicated profession, and every profession will be more complicated. And if we edit another element, fourth element, that it's the condition of our profession, so it's so rapidly change every 5–10 years. So I think in this situation, we cannot think about it to turn education of architects to the bigger specialities or any divided programs. Yeah. So I feel that for the future, architecture education is very important to choose a way how to educate in a universality way. Yes. And it means that there is really so bigger and bigger field of knowledge and necessary skills and so on, that we must very carefully choose what must be teach and what we can leave. And I think that in this time it's very necessary to teach to orient it in such complicated situations, not only in the architecture field or landscape field and so on, but also oriented in the society, in the life, in the culture, because it is so hard to orient it that maybe it is the main subject of our student plans to the future. And I think if we want to teach the better conditions for orientation in the foggy situation on present days, it's necessary to teach creativity, yes, but not creativity only on the art field, yes, because the architecture is art, but it's not only art, yes, it's not fine art, it's unfine art, yes, it is dusty art, and there are a lot of another problems which are knocking us on the doors of architects, like Inaki says, sociology, ecology, and so on and so on. So I think that we must teach architects that there must be more creative also in the thinking, yes, but humble thinking, not the thinking the hard way how it was maybe in the 20th century, that we too much believe to our truth. And we must also teach the feeling, because the empathy will be more and more useful and necessary for the architect in the future. So if we will do any changes, and they are necessary, but not only for these climatic changes and carbon foods and so on, yes, and we spoke very much about this thema, yes, but maybe we forgot for another changes which are, and I don't think so much on another continent. I live in Europe, so I know that our architects in the future will have a problem with the demographic, that there will be maybe less the population that the growing, that there will be necessary to know how to renovate, yes, and what is necessary, not renovate only the heritage, but renovate also, by the way, the ecology and footprint and so on, yes, because I think that the demolish the house and build new, it's not more ecological than to use the old one. And there is also another problem that maybe the future of architecture, especially in Europe, is not in the architects and education of architecture, but in the people who build the buildings. Yes, that in Czech a lot of buildings are still from the bricks, so we say the bricklayers. Yes, and nobody don't want to be a bricklayer in the future. Yes. Nobody wants have a dream that your son will be a bricklayer. Yes, and we feel it very much in contemporary, and it will be more and more drastic, and it will be change the architecture maybe more than our goals and thinking. Yes, because it must be, the architecture will be more oriented on the prefabrication and so on and so on. Yes. So maybe it's a short introduction from my side. I hope that I am optimist, yes, and I think that we must teach the open-minded architect.
Thank you. Thank you. Applause, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing the topic, let's say, down to the earth, all the way to the bricklayers and plumbers and all those without whom the buildings wouldn't stand. But not only buildings, but also infrastructure and other aspects of our profession. Great. I will then give audience the word after the whole panelists will have their speeches. And next in the row is Paola Vigano. Welcome, Paola, in here. And we'll just make a short introduction. Paola's again combining her practice as an architect and urbanist and educator. She's active at two schools, at EPFL, which stands for the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne in Switzerland. And there she holds a position of the professor in urban theory and urban design. And parallel to that, she's also teacher at the IUAV, University of Venice. In 1990, she started her professional practice together with Bernardo Secchi, which was one of the which were on the market for 24 years. Today, she heads Studio Paola Vigano, which works in urban, landscape, and public spaces projects in Europe. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Regina, and thanks to Inaki for the engaged introduction and presentation. I share a large part of what you said, but not everything, and maybe I will touch a small point. The question of universality, I think, is very embarrassing, you know, after a long period in which we are dealing with the differences and the importance of maintaining and develop differences, cultural differences, ecological differences, etc. So it's quite embarrassing not to come back to the idea of universality. And I will try to come there through a kind of lateral side. For sure, there is a question of rethinking a role for architects and for architecture. Again, I use as Inaki architecture as a large field where different things are combined. And to reconquer, I think, and this is very important, a presence in the actual societal debate. We are really absent from this debate. So before entering into universality, I think we should first understand some of the implications of entering this socio-ecological transition. And I propose to enter into this discourse to follow, let's say, one hypothesis that one fundamental shift we are facing is about the way in which we look at the territory. Let's say let's imagine that we can consider the territory as a subject and not as an object, as we have been used and we have been also educated as architects. So to look at this immense construction, because the territory is constructed, partially generated by us, humans, and partially generated by other dynamics that are not really managed by us. So the territory for me is this complex territory. So the territory subject or the subjectification of the territory has, I think, some important epistemological and ontological implications. As well, of course, as very profound ethical and political ones. In the research we do, so the teaching experience, reading spaces, interpreting them, and designing spaces, the questions raised by this idea of the territory subject and all the controversies, all the ambiguities, emerge today regularly also in the education process and with a certain, I would say, severity. So the subject, just to remain a moment on this, is individual, is anthropological, political, but is also subjected and subjugated. So it is a relational entity, and not abstract, a material one, which exchanges with other subjects. And it is, of course, and in any case, the result and the expression of relations of logics and the logics of power. So I would propose that to enter into this shift, this paradigm shift, there are two dimensions that have something to do with education. The first dimension is the epistemological basis of the transition, starting from this idea of the territory subject. So epistemological basis is how we can produce knowledge. And of course, I'm convinced since many years that the role of design and of the project, of the projection, of the idea of projecting is fundamental also for the interdisciplinary research. If you put at the center of interdisciplinary research, not a vague, ambition, but design and project, this becomes a way to construct an interdisciplinary knowledge, a situated knowledge, maybe not a generalized or maybe not universal, maybe situated, but nevertheless knowledge through different operation, conceptualizations, imagination, and descriptions. So to consolidate the hypothesis of design as a producer of knowledge, a powerful device for reading, deconstructing, recombinate, conceptualize, and project within the universe of the possible. Also, knowing that very often the direction of our gaze in the present lies in imagining the future. It's because we imagine the future in a certain way that our gaze change, let's say, position. So I would say that the first dimension, this epistemological dimension, asks for a new gaze, first of all. Maybe we can expand later. The second dimension, I think, is the ontological basis of the transition. Ontological means trying to understand, to list what is there, establishing criteria of existence of our reality. And if we start with the idea of the territory subject, it means that the territory is not just a resource to be exploited. It is a subject. And this obliges, I think, to explore value systems that do not coincide with the current ones. And this, I think, is a fundamental problem for education. For example, I think this push our work as teachers and professors to construct with the students counter spaces outside, and here is where my criticism to Inaki is, outside the simple problem-solving field that you put as a fundamental part of your within which, for example, if I think to the design studio, allows to systematically analyze and practice the set of paradigm shifts required by design for ecological and social transition. How can we explore this transition that is unknown, largely unknown, uncertain, remaining inside the system value of that we know today? And also in this point, utopia, that was also part of the discourse of Inaki, comes in, but maybe in a slightly different way, in the sense that through utopia we can structure a criticism of the territory in the present, the here and now, at the same time providing a projection that is similar to a kind of strange mirror in which topics and issues are transferred and resolved under conditions that are different from the current ones. That's a fundamental aspect of utopia, that you can bring things into another dimension where you can test things that would not be possible in the actual reality. So the sense of these explorations is to provide radical and extreme keys to interpretation, which are, I think, important for clarifying the gap between the current conditions and what could or should be in the future. These are not projects that lead to an immediate alteration of reality or to solutions. These are not projects that arrive often to solutions, but they act as mediating elements between this and the action of future change. So their ambition is to change the contour of the current discourse or the current system of value and to establish new ones. Of course, also the role of schools change then. Because if we imagine that we can explore counter spaces, we can work on counter projects, we can work on utopia as a critical tool, not just as a tool of let's say, fantasy. I think that also the role of school can take a different flavor in this direction of ethical also implications of the transition, testing new modes, experimental and educational platforms. So to conclude, I think that territorial complexity cannot be simplified, especially when we intend the territory as subject. And I'm quoting here what I wrote in the small abstract. Design and research by design are part of this complexity. They are inside this complexity. They are not above, they are not lateral, they are into the complexity, contributing knowledge that is rooted and situated in space and in time. A strong effort in imagination will be crucial to enter the transition, and I think that the attempt to cross this complexity in the educational experience, together with the students, experts, institutional and political decision makers, and communities, is today the pedagogical sense of what we call teaching. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. I'm looking forward to the discussion between Inaki and you later on. And now I'd like to introduce Johan de Walshe, who is kind of a known person and an active member of EAAE. He founded EAAE Educational Academy, as well as ARENA, an architectural research network. He's an engineer architect, a full-time academic staff member at the Faculty of Design Science at KU Leuven, where he founded a studio called ISTT, which stands for International Studies Territories in Transition. It is a research unit with a focus in rural territories in transition. But he is also focusing on design education methodology and its relation with research and practice. So we have an academic here, And I'd like to invite you for your 5 minutes. Provocations. I suppose it's going to be provocation.
Sure, I will provoke because I felt a strong like-mindedness with Inaki and with Vigano, and also some differences. But I use slides. I will use slides, and I hope that I will try to operate them. So I want to put attention to 3 perspectives first, and then try to make a conclusion. And I think that at least 2 of these perspectives are, in my opinion, insufficiently be present at the conference till now. So my first kind of question, do you know what this is? It's a kitchen. And do you know what this is? You say it's 2 kitchens. Actually, it are 3 kitchens because one picture is taken from one kitchen. But what's so interesting is, in this context of the Surinamese kampong and the plantation, when there is a party, these 3 kitchens, they join together. One is for the vegetables, one for the fish, one for the meat, and the space in between is like the common space in which food is prepared, or even in which parties are given. So it's a kind of ideal way of collectiveness that we try to promote so much, and it's just taking place over there. And do you know how they develop new allotments and new developments of urban housing? It's like this. They're just making plantations into allotments and repetitions of this housing, not taking account, even not seeing, not being aware of the life that actually is taking place. So it's amazing how you can do the wrong thing and try maybe to do the wrong thing better, but it doesn't help. So it's also not by making these buildings more sustainable, like these winners of the solar decathlon, and put PV cells on it, that we will have a real change and go for a better world. So this is my first observation or primary conclusion from one perspective, which is, I think la vie a toujours raison. Ilaria yesterday asked the question, what is it that should feed our design? And I think it's one of the most fundamental things, and it's the ontological question. So I would suggest to have the ontological question first, because first you have to know what there is, and then you can develop competencies, ideas about what to know about what there is. If you think you see already what there is, you will only use the knowledge and see the world from the knowledge that you already have. So this was my kind of...
We'll continue.
Yeah. So if the world changes so fast, or our interconnections with the world changes so fast, then I think it would be smart and prudent to assume that we have to postpone design till we are able to make design. And till we feel that we are able to handle the things that are there, that we have a kind of redefinition of what life is. So see the things that are there, but that we are not taking into account yet. I think self-confidence is a good thing, but self-confidence as a capacity of be open for what we don't know yet, and not as feeling us the person who has to create a new world consisting of the things that we think are marvelous. The second perspective is the perspective of education. And apparently architectural education has a certain universality. I show diagrams from preliminary results of an investigation into the sectors in which graduates, after having followed the study of architecture, eventually end up with. Mia already referred to it. It's an afterlife project. I put a QR code in it. You can still complete the survey. And there were some questions. Do you wish you had studied something different in architecture? And only a minority says they don't. They would have wished to study something different. Also, on the question which skills they thought would be the most important during their studies, and then the consequent question, do you still use these skills? The majority says that they still use the most important skills they learned in architectural education. So, looking at where graduates end up could lead to a conclusion that we have to change our education to minimize the mismatches to accommodate to these sectors. Or, in this case, it also could lead that apparently, although we provide higher education, not only teaching, but provide higher education through the very particular practice of architectural design, apparently we are able to provide graduates that are proficiently functioning in other sectors as well, and maybe we should not lose this competence. But it can also show that we deliver a lot of graduates who are just turning into a status quo and are very happy with it. So we also have to be critical towards the second conclusion. The third perspective is the epistemological. So what do we know? And This is a sketch made by Harriet Harris to map the different epistemological fields to which architecture is connected with. And one of the conclusions of having so many links could be, should we make closer connections with all these different epistemologies? And Hugo was referring to additional years to study sociology or anthropology. I don't think it's so easy. I even don't think it's feasible and even maybe not desirable. I really think that they have other epistemic cultures. It's not just a matter of knowledge, it's a way of functioning. And we have very bad examples of having students suddenly go to the social sciences. It's a huge confrontation. I really believe in distinct epistemic cultures. It could also have a risk of going back to the 70s, in which architecture didn't exist anymore, but was like an amalgamation of all these things. And this leads to an extreme dilettantism. So it's also a risk to use this conclusion. And I think the worst evolution that this epistemological mapping could lead to is that we learn our students to borrow vocabulary and to build a politically correct narrative to sell a project while doing exactly the same thing. And then I have a fourth point. So then after these three perspectives and critical looks at it, I think we have to try to denominate what it is that we actually do. What is this famous core? And I think in this regard, arguing that we educate generalists, it can be true, but it's not enough because it doesn't say what it is actually still. It's about a bit about everything. So I think we have to continue these attempts to say what it is. And I think we should, the key is not to be found in the epistemological. I think it is beyond the epistemological. And I would call it for a while the mode of operation, maybe a bit like new modes into new modes of existence. Of course, there is this epistemological level of knowledge, conceptual knowledge, the things that we can exchange, that accumulate as a stock of knowledge, as the Frascati manual call it. And of course, it's important to keep it, to cherish, to construct, to modify, to know what has been done, and to learn from what actually is. And it can, okay, then the other thing, it's not implemented yet. So we have to operationalize this in a way. And this can lead us to the second thing, which is the ability to deal with the other. I think if higher education has been invented by Humboldt, it was because it was clever within a state to have at least one institution that was dealing with problems for which no tailor-made solutions were available yet. And this was a common quest of the student and the professor. The ability of dealing with these type of questions of a higher order, I think is crucial. But it's not typical for the architect. Also, the engineers are doing it, social workers are social. Any graduate student of higher education should be able to have conceptions about how to do, what to do, and what ought to be done. So I think what then it is that we should be aware of, that when we conceive architecture or build architecture, it is a cultural performance. And this is not knowledge, it's a kind of state of be part of it, of belonging and of conforming this kind of culture by building. A song has to be sung, and only when a song has to be sung and there is music, you can dance. So I think it's important to be aware also of this. And then what this is about in architecture, I think it's about space, about spatial articulation, but I think one of the elements of the shift that we need and the change is care. To care about space and to take care about space. And I think the whole discussion about circularity, and the more we speak about circularity, the more this aspect of care comes into being. It's not a matter of delivering a building and say, my work is finished. Jeremy Till told, when it's there, it's the birth of the building. It only starts, and we should really be engaged. I think this is the real impact of talking about circularity, that we keep engaged in the environment, that we continuously articulate and adapt and be aware of how life responds to what we produce. So, conclusion about universality. If an education, if a student, after having been part of an environment in a climate entailing such modes of operation, and one decides then to leave to other fields and take up a role somewhere else, I would say, tant mieux for everybody. To conclude.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would like to close the kind of a educators part of the conference and welcome the students. Even though Vojtěch is a fresh graduate, but he reminded me that he's still a student of the PhD program here at the faculty. He is a very active person. He is the head of the Association of Students of Architecture here at the faculty called SPA, and he is also active at EAAE, specifically in EASA, the students' part of the organization. He was leading the workshop called Mind the Gap, and now he's going to make the results of their 5 days discussions and let's say struggle is going to make them public to us. I also are happy to give him more than 5 minutes, as the other speakers or panelists have. So the floor is yours, and you are welcome to have 10 or even 12 minutes with us.
Thank you for the introduction, Regina. Let me just make a brief correction. Unfortunately, not the head of the Students' Club anymore, but there's some other amazing people in the Students' Club. So let me introduce briefly the following contribution to the discussion. It will be kind of summary of the students' discussion workshop that we had preceding the conference, trying to answer the similar or the same topics that you've been discussing here, because we felt like students should be part of the discussion as well. We kind of self-organized this workshop, but also with a great help of the faculty members. So thank you everyone who took part in this. We were talking in a group of 5 people for the last few days, starting Monday, and then meeting after each of these discussions and discussing the same topics, trying to react on these. I will probably talk with a way more simple language, and let me make a brief summary. It may be just a reminder of some values of architectural education that we have managed to figure out that are important to us as students. Despite it was just 5 of us, we had the experience from about 10 universities with our exchange studies, and last but not least also various workshops and the European Architecture Students Assembly, which is a very inspiring organization, and recommend for further discussion this later. We were discussing not only the topics of the conference but also some material that was already published on the topic of architectural education, and it was very surprising on one side for us that these more than 50 years old ideas are still very up to date. Maybe it has something to do with the fact how we are able to cope with the challenges in the changing world or not. And let us first have a look at a few simple questions to take a clear standpoint, and then develop further on the topics. Sometimes the most simple questions help us keep on track and what we're trying to do. So to all these questions, is the world changing? Obviously it is. Does architectural education and the systems need to be revisited constantly? Apparently it seems so, right? That's why we were discussing here. And does it manage to follow up? Does the architectural education manage to follow up the changing world? That's the question for all of us. Maybe we could do slightly better. We have also discussed various topics of these radical pedagogies, which is a website I recommend you to study further if you haven't came across with. There's a lot of case studies on the topics of architectural education that were present in the last century. Just this morning I've bumped into this TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson, which is just incredibly inspiring, despite it's not very fresh. It's about 15 years old, from 2006, is it? And it's still very up to date. It's focusing on education and still questioning the same things. So let us have a look at what we have discussed. Obviously, tradition and the overall sense of the profession leads to generalism, which we think is perfectly fine, as we have discussed. Because if you have a look in nature, we can see that over-specialization of the species leads to extinction when they're not able to adapt anymore. So when architects say that we are specialists in generalism, sometimes it's followed up with a sad ironic smile, but I think it's not really necessary. I think it's really perfectly fine. And also, we have came across with the fact that the universities can't handle with all the problems in the world. Universities are very, in a way, rigid structures, which is also fine. It's huge structures of a lot of people. So when the schools of architecture were set up, let's say that the world was looking like this, and the School of Architecture tried to cover this field, and then multiple more questions arise, and then the school tries to adapt it. Sometimes it manages to cover some of the surroundings, but it doesn't necessarily need to cover everything. It's just not possible because the dots are just too far from one another. And there is also other schools, not only schools of architecture, that already cover these other topics that are arising in the world. So maybe it's important that we have this diversity, and we don't necessarily need to cover everything. We need to communicate with the other schools to be able to get in touch with the other problems and tackle them, and to create all these connections. We don't need to manage everything at once. Just a reminder. So we don't need to be that strict with ourselves, maybe, and to manage everything in the educational systems. But, however, what are the requirements for architectural education? Is it enough to be a good architect, or do we have some basis of pedagogical minimum when we teach people, when we teach young architects, when we teach these motivated young generations, as you have mentioned? Do we manage to talk to each other? Are we ready to learn from our students, as yesterday somebody had asked these nice questions? Maybe it could be better. At all these schools of architecture, we need some infrastructure. We have this amazing new school, which has some limits, but it doesn't really matter how the infrastructure looks like precisely, because there are some things that are maybe more important than the physical infrastructure, some things that you can't inscribe in those study plans, and that's the human infrastructure and the atmosphere that is created at the schools of architecture. So I know that following up this conference, that was very specialized in a way. It was specialized on architectural educational systems. I would just like to remind us not to forget this human aspect of education, that it's people we're talking to and people we're talking with, and we're trying to have discussions with. So architecture universities should maybe incorporate more of a sense of feeling at home. Let us just put it this simple way, because that's something that creates atmosphere of trust and inspiration and personal development. It's not only the way of feeling at home that it should be easy for the students, not at all. This freedom that we strive for comes with a great responsibility for ourselves and for our education. As I tried to draw in this diagram, it's perfectly fine that universities can't cover everything, because we as students should have the responsibility to try to find the other aspects of education, and we as architects should develop during our lifetime, and we should still teach new stuff. So let's just try to encourage ourselves more. I mean ourselves as students, ourselves as pedagogues, as architects teaching at the schools. The sense of feeling at home is also achieved through culture of openness and acceptance towards diversity. We have bumped into this topic many times, that diversity is a value simply. Also, acceptance of failure is something very important if we want to create new things and if we want to be creative, because we need to accept failure as part of the process. And we need this process-oriented educational systems, not only the result-oriented ones. So it's these very simple topics that maybe we are all aware of. Maybe we tend to forget about these sometimes. So this was a brief conclusion of the students' workshop focused on these topics. And it would be great if we wouldn't forget about this after the conference ends. I would be really grateful if you all would have asked these questions when you're on your plane or bus home and before your semester starts in a few days or weeks. I would like to encourage you to talk to students more. As there was this workshop in Zagreb in the EAAE conference 2 years ago, the conclusion was basically help us to help you. I can just underline this and remind this once again, because I can promise you that the students will do their best if they're given the chance. And that's about the workshop. I have one small personal note at the end. You don't need to take it personally, but it's a personal note from me. Let me just say that maybe we should be more critical to ourselves. We don't necessarily need to agree with all the ideas. We don't necessarily need to create same educational systems all over the world. There's also this diversity on multiple scales that we can cover just some parts of the education, and that's also a value that we have various educational systems, that we don't need to find one how-to manual, how to teach architecture. That's when the responsibility comes in the play. But please, let's not forget about who are we talking about and who are we talking to. I'm here representing the students' voice, but actually the students are watching us online because they weren't able to pay the fee for the conference. And I'm laughing because it seems funny to me by now, but I think it's not funny at all. It shouldn't happen, these things. If we talk about exclusiveness and inclusiveness, we kind of agree on that we should be inclusive. So who do we want to include in this discussion, and how do we do it? Where are the people that we talk about, the carpenters and the bricklayers? I'm aware of the fact that this is just a piece of the EAAE organization, and this is this large conference. But wouldn't it be perfectly fine if there were the bricklayers sitting in between us, and more students and more pedagogues from other fields, from other faculties, from other universities? Why are they not present in this discussion? We should be more open in all these ways, and let us constantly question if we are doing it well enough. As you have mentioned in the previous panel, Mr. Dean of our faculty, Ladislav Lábus, had mentioned a really nice note of humbleness of education and humbleness of thinking, inclusive empathy. That's important, of course, but where does this actually happen? You know, aren't we talking about stuff that we agree on, but don't we forget to apply it later? Yeah, I didn't mean to be provocative, but I think it was necessary to be said. Yeah, so maybe let's just be more inclusive. It's a good ending of this speech.
Thank you. So, here we are. We can open the discussion. If I may start with my first question, I feel a bit kind of not a tension, but let's say controversy between what was said yesterday and what was said today, specifically in the question of, let's say, architecture form. Yesterday it was Lars Markus who said that the center of architecture knowledge lies in the architecture form. And today we have heard from Inaki that the architecture objects, the architecture forms, are not able to solve today's problems. So can I ask you, Inaki, about to comment on that and to kick off the discussion from this point, for example?
Wow, yeah, putting me in the spot. Thank you. Yes, I believe that that what we need to focus is in solving the issues, the societal issues that are pressing today. I think it's a really important part to be relevant to society, and maybe not looking so much to ourselves and to what we are supposed to do and what is the core of what we do, and to play the game outside and say, well, what are the issues that are pressing and how we deal with them. And we have then I think we are the profession that is best prepared to deal with complexity, because in our education we are dealing with cultural issues, social issues, technical issues, construction, materials, programming, basically putting conflicts together. Architecture is about dealing against gravity. We start with that. We start dealing against gravity. It's a conflict. So I think we are the best prepared profession. In the moment that we stop looking at our belly and begin to look outside and to say, how can I contribute? How my skills contribute? And then we have unique skills. We have spatial skills, because we are in a spatial world. We have the ability to preview, to imagine transformations, to vision in that transformation. I think we are really, I think that's for me what is the strength of architecture. And of course, we shape things. And of course, it's a cultural profession. And we have thousands of years of culture. I don't think engineers study history of engineering, surprisingly.
Just probably in the first lecture.
Maybe one semester. We stick all the semesters dealing with history of architecture. So we are really committed to shape the world. So it's not a contradiction. We shape, but the shape is the result of processes. And the first is this managing this complexity, being creative with this complexity, and committing to solve problems that are out there.
So we are supposed to shape, but not save. We are supposed to shape the world, but not save the world.
Collaborate in saving the world. I think it's an obvious mission.
Any reaction from the panel on this topic? Architectural form and the role of architect.
I think that also relating to the contribution of Paola, I think kind of difficulties with form is that it relates quite close to object. And I would prefer like spatial articulation, for instance. And one of the interesting things on this word of articulation is that you can understand it in different meanings. One is how things are separated and interlocked, and look at the interlocking of these things, but also how words are pronounced, and then it has to do with how others receive it and how well they can receive it. So I think it's more interesting to talk about spatial articulation than about architecture form, I would say.
Thank you. Also, because, form is not a problem only for architects. I would say that is a much more strict problem, for example, for mathematicians or for some type of physicians. So I think we should also stop to consider certain things ours. Now, space is our. Now, we are among those that have developed a certain expertise on space, but space is a very complex concept in itself, and we work on certain aspects of space. For example, some physical, tangible, concrete things that you merge in space. But space is something that is more than this, has many other components. And the same for form. So I think that we have to start to be happy of a different position. No? We are changing our position in the world. And I think this is not, in itself, is not a problem. If we are open enough to digest this, it's not a problem, because it opens to many other things. For example, relational aspects that we have not developed so much in the past. Relational with other disciplines, relational with other subjects. And I think this is just enriching our work and not diminishing the importance of what we do. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Ladislav.
I think that it is very important to think about this problem with what was present Inaki, but I think that we cannot think that architects save and our students save the world, yes, because it's not possible without all society if don't think like in this idea. The architects cannot change it. Yes, and if we will teach our students that they are the savers of the world, there will be we must teach humble architect, yes, not the dominator if the saving of the world. Yes, and I agree with a lot of things which you said, and I also was amazing by this complexity of your thinking and graphs and so on. But also if I see some pictures which you show from these devastated cities, I suppose that it's not from Europe. I think that the ecological care or climatic changes care has the same problem like exporting the democracy. Yes. It's very hard to export to the other countries where, because the people in these countries must care, yes, and some pictures shows that they don't feel necessity of care about the environment around there. Yes. So I think that we must be carefully about it and do it by sophisticated methods. Because it could be changed like with democracy and with no, it's enough.
But you touched an interesting point, democracy, which brings me into like political part of our profession, and that's also going back to your question. That's what you said, and what I found interesting. Whether we can still speak and share the corpus of our profession across the region and continents. You know, would you elaborate a little bit more on this? Because why am I asking? You know, I feel that here we are, you know, within the Europe, we are representing different European standards. You are active in the United States. I think it's totally different word from when you speak only about academia, let's say, you know. And going further east, south, you know, there are again, you know, different political backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, which our profession is kind of taking its ground from. So I totally agree with you that, you know, in each country the profession is really different. That's probably what Ladislav also touched upon in this.
Yeah, I think architecture has architecture, landscape architecture, all the fields of the built environment have a complicated situation in how we deal with the dynamics that are out there. In a way, if we want to build, if we want to be active, we have to engage with economic dynamics that are there, with political dynamics. It's a tricky situation. When looking back to how in the 20th century architecture has been committing to certain topics, to certain political agendas, to certain transformations of society, and in the moment that architecture, especially in the United States, decides to retreat from that, it's explained as a disciplinary movement or a disciplinary position, but it's actually a political position. In the moment that you renounce to take on certain larger agendas, you are automatically deciding what are you focusing in. And in this case, in the service to the market. Architecture decided that, well, this is in the 60s. This is very complicated. We have all the revolutions of the 60s. Architecture needs to retreat to what really we are good at, that is doing objects. It seems like an innocent, but it's very politically charged. Because then when you are doing objects for whom? You are doing objects for the consumer. So we are always in a kind of difficult position in how we are. Are we leading at some point? Are we committing at some point? Are we service providers at some point? And maybe when talking about the problem solving that Paola you were mentioning, maybe it all depends on the question of the problem. I really like to be humble in that sense. We solve problems. And I think it's very important to solve problems. What is the question of the problem? That's because if the question of the problem is the Swan and the Dolphin Hotel for Walt Disney, that's one position. If the problem is another scale of the problem, it takes into account other complexities and a deep responsibility. At least that's what I believe and I talk with students about. Even when you are doing a private project for someone, you are consuming materials, you are consuming energy, you are leaving a footprint, you are creating traffic, you are using the air, you are using the public. So what is your commitment to all that goes beyond that response to your client? And then I think that's the political dimension and commitment of the architect.
If I would like to continue on this, it's interesting to connect the retreat of the profession of architect in the United States as a way maybe to respond politically, as you said, so a kind of criticism towards the market, so the profession of architects inside the cruel rules of the market, and to pretend for a different position. I'm reflecting in these last years on the fact that the architecture, urbanism, they were strongly embedded into the modern biopolitical project. And in fact, you showed clearly the fact that they are the goals, the objectives, the political ambitions were clearly settled. There was emancipation, there was the idea of democratic development. So architecture was part of this. Then in the last 30, 40 years, there was this different scope determined by the economic development, the different new and aggressive forms of capitalism. And architects, in some cases, were really embarrassed in remaining inside that. Also, then you could only choose, or you were in your ivory tower, or you were really into this battle, let's say. And this was something that denaturated the modern project. But today, we cannot rely on this modern project anymore, because nevertheless, it's very far away. And it was nevertheless led by the idea of consuming the world, the planet, let's say. And we cannot rely on the more recent biopolitical project that even worse. So the transition is also a transition, in my opinion, towards a new biopolitical project. And there the question is, where are we? Are we participating to construct this new biopolitical project? And I use the bio not only in the sense of Foucault towards humans, but I use bio in a more general sense. So are we participating? Do we think that education has to deal with this new biopolitical project that might be the output of reframing, let's say, the way in which we design and in which we live on the planet? I think that this is really the big transformation that we are going through, that has to be put in at the same time as a question related to life, how do we live on the planet, but also as a political question that is relating to the role of architecture inside the political debate.
Yes, Ladislav, and then Johan. Yes.
I also remember and want to react on some speech that maybe we forgot that we have some directive in Europe for education in architecture which don't allow the specialization or specialization in the big scale. Yes, we cannot. We have in this directive there is this 11 points, yes, and which must be integrated to the education of architects. And I think that every school in Europe want to be notified by European Commission and want to. So this condition which are asked in this directive, we cannot leave. We can maybe more oriented on the urban or on the construction and so on, but we cannot put out any from these 11 components of the education of architects. Yeah. And what is interesting that I remember in the history it was very frequently discussed, this directive, and there was goals to change it and so on. And now in the last year we don't speak very much about it. Maybe we are satisfied with last novelization in 2013 when there was prolonged the requested education in architecture from 4 to 5 years, yes, and it's enough for us. Yeah. But it's also one point of view. Yes, I don't want to be here like the officer of European Commission, but it's also when we speak about the specialization in education of architects, we must think also about these conditions which are in Europe and recommend it for all world.
Yes, so now that so I just remind that there are European regulation or directive which was, as Ladislav mentioned, in 2013, which is already, let's say, 8 years, and in this rapid changes we are experiencing, there is a question whether they shouldn't be renewed. Anyway, Johan wanted to react on Paola.
I will skip the legislation level for a while because I think we also have to define how to operate, and then the law is there to make our operation possible. So I would try to start from this problem-based thing and then come back to situatedness. I also would rather object to depicting architecture as problem-based oriented. Of course, every action you can relate it to solving a problem, but then it is a post-rationalization, I think. So I have 3 reasons why to be against this idea of problem-based as the approach of architectural education. And the first one is, like I told you, I think some things you are doing out of habit. It's a continuation of what you are doing. It's like cultivating the land. It's like cultivating our lives. And I think one of the things that architects get frustrated is that they overestimate their role. In one of my questions, I made the comparison with a medical doctor. I have 2 sons. One is architect, the other is a doctor. A doctor doesn't choose the patients that come to him. He takes care for everybody who is there. He doesn't want to improve life in general, the world, but he does improve life of people. And he has a certain relationship, and he keeps having these patients and kind of following up. I don't see, also in the presentations of this conference, I miss this possibility of delivering architects that are interesting in cultivating the life, how we inhabit the world and play a role in spatial articulation of how we just continue. It's always about innovation, technological innovation. It is like other inputs that will change how we will take care. But I think this continuity, it is not problem-based, it is like how we cultivate the territory, our lives. The second reason why is that we can decide to provide alternatives and to offer new vistas that are not based in the same problem space as which caused the problem. It was Einstein who said you cannot solve the problems that we caused within the system that caused the problems. So we as conceivers, creative, abductive thinkers can suddenly have maybe this, what if, and it's not problem driven, it is driven by alternatives, by this abductive thinking, associations. And for this reason, we need to be connected with many inputs, with many things. And that, again, is a cultural given. What is it that make us oracle, that make us produce? It is situated. It depends on where you are and where you belong to. And you can be critical to this positionality, and maybe you have to take another position and then be open. It's amazing to be inspired by leave your position and be open for another position. And I think we should stimulate students to be everywhere in different conditions and to develop this openness. And the third reason why to object is more practical. I have the experience that problem-based is like problem-based learning, and then you have pedagogies that are fixed frames. And one of the stages is make an analysis. But then you make an analysis of a problem, and the problems are wicked, we know. So the solution is defined by how we define the problem. And we define the problem in terms of what we already know. So there is a kind of hidden preconception of a possible solution already. We do not open for other possibilities and alternatives. And then we are, again, trying to do the wrong thing better in a way, but in I think, the wrong way. So situatedness happens in the fact that once you are open and to interact with the world, it's Dewey also how we interact with the world, not take a detached position of we design a building for them to inhabit. If you design the building, you are part of people that have this same world out of which this building results, as the song that has to be sung. So how to dance with territory in the articulated space that we belong to, and where are we situated, and when do we decide to, where are we absent? I think these are questions that maybe we are not putting ourselves enough.
Yeah, maybe there's this thing with connecting the dots backwards. Like you can't always aim for managing everything, and you just have some direction, right? And then at some point you revisit it and you see if it works, or you need to adjust it some bit. Also, there's this saying that some problems need to be solved on other level than they were created, right? That if we keep the same patterns of thinking, not only about problem solving and meaning like constructing architecture, but also maybe educational systems, we can't solve the problems on the same level as they were created. So if there's something wrong, maybe we need to step out of this positioning, as you have mentioned, and get into the discourse, or the other people get into the discourse, the people that are not in the schools normally, not in the profession normally. And this book by Fuller, Education Automation, he's mentioning a lot that we are educating in our universities people whose brains are already mostly closed. Our brains are developing from the youngest age, right, till age of 8. It's this very open, colorful brain, able to grasp everything. Then it's starting to slowly close up, as Sir Ken Robinson says, or questions if universities kill creativity, do they? Or can we encourage it? Maybe it's not necessary. Universities don't necessarily kill creativity. We just need to step out of this pattern and talk to all these other people that we normally don't talk to, including the maternity schools, including those people on Southern Hemisphere. If you, sorry for put it this way, but
yeah,
I think it's crucial.
Inclusivity.
Conditions in which you educate, and that.
Yeah, and it always comes to the same point, right? That we should just talk to each other more. As you have shown, Johan, this picture of the kitchen, I was like, of course, this is the way how the things should work. If they are not polluted by the modernized, globalized ways of thinking, it used to work. There used to be this dirty kitchen that used to work multiple ways. But then somehow we started to create these cities and these meshes that enclose themselves, and we are losing this connection. So we are again getting backwards to this openness and inclusivity, talking to each other, listening to each other. Yeah.
Thank you. Inaki wants to comment on this.
I'd like to continue the conversation because I'm very optimistic about our capacity as architects. So I think that the kitchen thing is a perfect demonstration of really bad architecture, of a really bad architect that is not able to see. and it's coming with prejudices and completely foreign lenses. And I think that's definitely a problem of not being able to learn. That is our main capacity as it's supposed to be in this open mind that we are educated. So I'm optimistic because I think that's we really need to develop the idea of the question to solve the problem, which is the problem. The problem is not to put a conventional roof on top of these people. That's not the way they live. No? So that was a bad question, let's say, with a terrible answer. No?
Nuanced, the roof is not too bad. It's the roof.
I don't know, but probably it goes back to the idea of what is that needs to be done, as opposed to what we want to do. Yes. And this is, with my students, I'm a little bit radical and say, if you talk me about your project, I'm not interested. If you talk about the project, what needs to be done, I'm all ears. If you tell me about what you want to do, I don't care. What is that is needed? How can we get out from ourselves to respond with open mind? Because sometimes we are in the problem of architects enjoying doing expression of ourselves. And I think that's a problem, and that puts us out of society in a way. And it puts us in a corner. Oh, these are crazy, creative people. I hate that. Oh, crazy designer. No, of course not. We are very thoughtful designers. No? Our role is to go out there, understand, and try to find what are the solutions. So I think I'm very optimistic in that sense. Yesterday I was at night talking to my partner Margarita. She taught the first class of site strategies, a course that talks about how to engage with the physical reality of the world. And it's a core for second years, but also non-architecture students. And it reminded me what Ole Gustafsson said yesterday about the concern about attracting young people to our fields, because they don't feel like they can do useful things. and two students came after the class to Margarita and said, oh, is this architecture? What she explained, is this architecture? Then I'm very interested. So how we bring people to our fields that are wanting to have an impact in the world and taking things seriously and say, no, the physical transformation is a great way to impact. It's better than business. Come here. You will learn how to understand cultural, political, economical, technical, material, ecological issues, and then have an impact. I'm very optimistic in that sense.
Thank you for your optimism, and now we will have a look online. If I may ask Kateřina to...
Is it on? No. Okay, is it on? Okay, so there is a very nice discussion going on the chat. So I don't know if maybe the... Oh, yes. No. Okay. I don't know. Yeah, so I can maybe read some of the chat messages. So there are some thankful messages like thank for a great talk to Inaki Alday, or a great contribution from student side. That is the most important one. And then there are some longer messages, so I maybe will read some of them. My both hands to do that. So there is one from Peter Morgenstein, and he's saying that architects often tend to be self-centered, maybe sometimes even with signs of dictatorship. If we want to make a change, we need to listen to others, and we must not fall into the illusion we understand everything and can solve everything. Humbleness is the key when dealing with other cultures, new problems, and other professions. So, nice.
Thank you. Probably we can comment on that, because my feeling is that our profession still attracts people who are very, like egoistic and would like to show off and so on. So I always see a contradiction between this, and some of our students say, my father always wanted I become an architect, so that's why I'm studying architecture. On the other hand side, we say, empathy and, humbleness. Yesterday we heard that 50% of architecture students from Karel Smejkal mentioned the research 50% of the students are introvert, which is not very much in compliance with what I have just said. But do you have any opinion, or somebody from you would like to comment on this, what was said in the online chat? If not, then I can ask Kateřina to read probably the last comment which was there, and then we can give word to you.
Yeah, so then there is Massimo Santanicia, who reminds what the recommendation to UIA member section is, that how the architecture education should look like. So he says that like 2 points: to produce competent, creative, critically minded, and ethical professional designers and builders, and to produce good world citizens who are intellectually mature, ecologically sensitive, and socially responsible. Yeah, so this is like his point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And now I saw one question there from Aarhus, from Esra.
Thank you. Esra Akin from Aarhus School of Architecture. I think Vojtěch expressed not only the ideas of the students joined in the workshop, but also the reality of our time, which can't be underestimated. I think the universality might be accepted only in the context of communication, openness and inclusivity. I think we have to come to that non-hierarchical set of mind, maybe thinking and establishing our environments in a collaborative way, or with a collaborative set of mind, is going to take us to create a medium of sharing instead of teaching at the university. So maybe the only thing we need to do at the schools of architecture is creating a medium for the tools of creativity, for a vision of creativity, the freedom of creativity, and of course, finally, the impact of creativity. Sorry, there's no question in that, but I like to share my idea. Thank you.
Yeah, creativeness and creativity, it was mentioned also yesterday, today as well, Johan.
But I think we should not claim that creativity is something specific for architecture or for design. I think everybody, it's just a great thing in our lives that people are creative. I think everybody can be challenged, and creativity is a way of finding solutions and even a joyful way of dealing with constituents of the world. So I think it's crucial, but it's not specific or particular or exclusive for us. I think we have to think on other things that are where the specificity is situated.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Pavla?
Thank you. I'm following up on a small story for yesterday when we said goodbye with colleagues. I said that I have to go to work also a little yesterday. And Honza Jehlík reacted and asked, so do you think you here the whole day didn't work? And I think it's partly one of key questions we are discussing according which was repeatedly sounded yesterday, that the very final core of our profession is to shaping built environment, to make buildings physical, and I agree. but the question is if also theoretical platforms like writing about architecture, lecturing, making exhibitions, biennale, and also conferences like here discussing about architecture, how much they are formative, how much they are able, not immediately, but directly influence this core goal of our profession, this creating built environment. And me personally, my answer is yes. If I generalize, I think that these theoretical platforms are able to form also at the end this physical environment, and not only during influencing people who are really creating it, but also, for example, through influencing normal people, how they are perceiving environment, because I think that environment we are creating, the people, for them, it's not this real environment, but the way how they are perceive it. So my question to you is, if you think that and how these theoretical platforms are able to directly be part or formate this built physical environment, our goal, core goal of our profession. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Was it like, if I understood correctly, how the theoretical platform influences the built environment in general, or the built environment shaped by students in the studios? No.
How we all as architects, we are active in these theoretical platforms, during, through them, how we are shaping the real environment, built environment, not only students, but we all as practical architects.
Not in education, but...
Not only education, but also education.
May I respond to this? It's like, obviously I'm just 26 years old, so it's just an intuition or a feeling I have. I feel like, of course, it forms the built environment in long term, but only when we do not forget on those people we are talking to and we are shaping the environment with. Because if we make amazing exhibitions and lectures and talks and we just enclose ourselves, we get exactly to this point that someone has mentioned here, that we become very detached from the real world. But that's hopefully not the case, or let's not aim for that. Let's aim for the opposite. I feel like this is another step in the culture of this profession, maybe. With the development of the profession, there comes this multiple layers of it, and that architects shouldn't only construct houses, but also teach and make lectures and be culturally involved with his community and surroundings and academia. I feel like it's just another layer that definitely forms it, but as as any other tool, we need to use it in a correct manner. Otherwise, it's malfunctioning. What do you think?
Please. If I can add something to this, I think that, yeah, we have, of course it is important and is influential. As I said before, we are restructuring the discourse, what if we are maintaining. And I think that we need, again, to be creative and considering the difficulties of exchange among certain partners, certain actors. For example, cities, administrations, people working in cities, they make a lot of things, a lot of transformation in space. And there are not so many moments which you exchange with them, putting together also professionals, students, and researchers. So, for example, recently, 1 year ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, we started a cycle of seminars. The title is New Climates in. So it's imagined to be run in different cities. New Climates in Lausanne. We start from, of course, the closest one. And this is a way to construct conditions where you can have a dialogue, where academy and society can really share questions, and not only problem solving, not only bringing the solution, not only does the academy arriving with the solution or with the total systemic construction, but also having this kind of permeable relations with others. It's not easy, in fact, because, for example, the city administration is not totally autonomous. No, it's politically directed, so they cannot really express their position. But nevertheless, they are really fundamental, and I think in this project of the transition, those that are materially, I'm speaking of the city more than the architectural object, but those that are really transforming the city are mainly people that are part of public services, for example. And I think that we have to construct bridges among these different, from students to them, to really more, let's say, scientific researchers, and society in general, associations. This kind of openings doesn't mean that we should not reflect on our own contribution. So now, in this idea of being very permeable, maybe we risk to forget a fundamental point that I think was part of some of what the Dean of the School of Architecture was proposing. There is a kind of solidity we have to construct also of our own contribution. What can we add to this public debate? We have to be present in the debate. Maybe we have even to create this debate. But at a certain moment, we have also to ask ourselves, what are we bringing to this debate? And there is the epistemological problem. Because you have a specific gaze, can be open, but nevertheless is very much connected to space, how you describe the space, how you interpret the space, and we have specific tools. So I think that the two aspects are not in contradiction. It's not because you want to be, let's say, solidly disciplinary that you are not open to the world and to the other disciplines, to the other levels of the questions we have to deal with. So this balance between the horizontal and the vertical is something we have to make more explicit, I think. Mm-hmm. What is the vertical part? So what is the peculiarity of our gaze? What are we bringing, in fact, to this large dialogue that then is inclusive, is open, etc. But what are we bringing, in fact? Because I come back to the kitchen. They don't need ask architects for those kitchens. So we can easily get to the point where we say, okay, maybe, and this has already been said many years ago by Manfredo Tafuri, maybe we have concluded our role. Maybe we are not so necessary. So I think that, because I think the opposite, of course, it's very important that we clarify what we bring. Because otherwise, in this total permeability, maybe we lose something. And I don't agree with Johan when you say that the doctor just want to help one patient. Or no, the doctor has the ambition to make life better. The same high ambition as an architect.
In small steps.
Of course, a small step.
And immediate connection with what is there already, and not what is
I agree
about what the other person should be.
I agree, but I think that you have to recognize that there is something that is larger ambition, also from the doctor's side.
I'll give.
And we can live with this.
There is a motivation.
Larger, yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Inaki wants to comment on you.
I want to answer to that question, quoting Vojtěch and Paola. You were mentioning in the answer that of course it's part of, but it has to be well addressed, no? Well directed, and I completely agree, because sometimes the so-called theoretical approach that it's interesting, a small writing of Richard Sennett that criticized the use of theory for all the fields, bringing it from sciences to create a kind of strange animals in other fields that do not have actual theory that can be proved. No? So I think it's important, your point, especially, and in the US is very patent, because the academia and the profession are very separated, and there are no practicing faculty in many places. That the theoretical work is self-justification in many cases. No? So a lot of installations, a lot of things that are to justify a career. And that's problematic because there's a lot of talent there and it's not put to good use. So I think that's an important consideration that you made. And then quoting Paola, because your work in the academic realm is about research projects that are long-term research projects. And I think that's a really important power that we have at the schools of architecture and at research universities in general, that we can actually tackle big issues with total freedom, total intellectual freedom and enormous capacity. So I sometimes wonder, are we really using the energy? You have 12 students, many of them brilliant, one faculty member, an entire university around, 3, 4, 6 months. Of course, there's an educational component, but what else? What else? What is the knowledge that this enormous amount of energy is producing? So I think that's a real important responsibility when we are in academia. What is the production of knowledge that comes from so many hours? I still remember how many hours we spent drawing for a semester. No? So what do we bring from that? So I think we could rethink education more intentionally about the knowledge production that happens at the same time that this education, with the benefit of the education in a constant mindset for innovation, for questioning, for not giving the right answer immediately, to not formulate the problem, but again, reformulate the problem, reformulate the question through this inquisitive process, that we have these enormous resources. I mean, if you imagine you have in the office like 12 people, 4 months. Okay, let's do. Of course, the school is not an office. It should be much more in that sense. So I think it's an enormous capacity that we have there, that we have to make sure that we use to the best of students and society in general.
Thank you, Inaki. If you want to, because we are running out of time, so if you...
But I just want to say that I think they are crucial, these kind of platforms, as steps in the whole cycle of how we come to meaning and how decide what ought to be done. It are steps of conceptualizing, and then I think theory is built, so there is a practice of theorizing. And this is an interesting practice. I like the way how Inaki had this retrospection and showed some results of these theorizing practices in offices, and this is what they were able to do, this is what they were not able to do. Every theory has been developed because there was a reason and because there was an urge to look at certain things, and certain things have not been looked. And I think it's good not only to build our own argument in the debate, but to know the arguments of others before we speak and build our arguments and use the arguments of the others as well. And I think that is the role of the university. I think we are also in this conference maybe too much considering the university as a kind of environment in function of education. But I think it should also be in function of the profession and of society, of course. And I even have said in another conference that I have, maybe sometimes I think that we have been academizing architectural education too much while the profession remains completely under-academized. Once you left university, it's up to you. That's
why we need them.
Incredible, yes. And it's a role that university should explicitly take up, but also bridge and look for this. Communication, like yesterday, is not how we will explain to laymen the relevance of architecture. I think communication is making bridges between the different aspects so that the university gets connected and as situated as any cultural performance.
Thank you. We have another question.
Manuel Blanco from Universidad Politécnica de Madrid for an exam. We have been talking 3 days, and Paola Vigano was saying very clearly now, what are we bringing? And I think that's a very important question because we are in a turning point. Pandemic has changed the life. Pandemic has changed finally.
Sorry, may I interrupt you? Could you please speak a little bit louder? I'm not sure whether you can understand. If you can speak a little bit louder.
Okay.
That's
Excuse me. We have been talking 3 days. And during 3 days, now Paola Vigano was resuming it very well. What are we bringing? What is the thing that architects are bringing to society in this moment? How we can contribute? And we are in a turning point. We have been talking about the change of paradigm for years. But now, finally, the paradigm have changed. Pandemic have done it. The system have changed. The elements are there. The relationships have changed. So we are in another different world, in another different territory. We are wearing this, or I am very afraid because I am not wearing this in Prague. And I don't know what's going to happen. Of course, I'm going to do a test coming back to Madrid. I am Manuel Blanco from the School of Architecture at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. For me, it's a turning point. And I don't know how you are conceptualizing this, because if we don't do it, it will be done for us. We have now a beautiful announcement made by van der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, called the New European Bauhaus. And it's not a question of the budget. Everybody is looking how the money is coming and how the budget is coming. But this, I guess, the most promising and illusory and beautiful video I have heard for a politic talking about cities, talking about territories, talking about society. Are we going to be able to go with this challenge? Because the ball is in the field of architecture. But I don't know if architects, we are prepared to take this ball, because all the other professions around us are studying how to take a piece of the cake. The solving problems of the engineering are already settled how to do it. So, well, Madrid is going to propose the New European Bauhaus as a subject for next year, but it's going to do that because we are really worried. I remember very well, I am maybe one of the oldest in this place, and I remember very well something that was very promising before even my house. The 100 flowers movement. Let's grow 100 flowers, let's 1,000 flowers, 100 schools of thought flourish. Now, made this, everybody was thinking and talking about what's going to be done. Afterwards, the flowers were cut. And the heads were cut. And a repression came. Now is the moment to really stand and explain what we are, how we can help, how we can contribute, and to define what's an architect, what is a school of architecture. Because I don't really know if we are schools of architecture or we are schools of architects. And that's two different things. If we are going to work one with the other in the field and how we are going to do it. So I really would like, if we have 2 minutes at the end, your opinions, Paola, Inaki, all of you, the students, and how we can do it, and how we can do it before the rules will be settled for us.
So how can we set up the rules before somebody else do it for us? What's the question, if I'm right?
Well, maybe it was, or at least I felt that it was part of the discussion that, as maybe Jenny in the very beginning had mentioned, that we do have the chance to lead the dialogues, and that's our specialty in the generalism, right? That we have the chance to lead the dialogues. So maybe we just need to do it.
Thank you. I think the answer could be short because we are speaking already for quite some time. Johan, if you want to.
I think there is a restriction of European higher education area that says that we have this level 7 and it's a master in architecture. And part of it will be architects, but it is an academic education in architecture. And I think if the school decides to profile itself as a school that delivers architects, it's a very clear position and it can be communicated, but still within the legal framework, it will be a master in architecture.
Thank you. Paola?
Well, I have to come back to what I already said. I think that on the side of the epistemology, we have to work on the gaze. So our gaze will be different. And I think I have to say we are not ready we are not ready, the professors and the students neither. So together with them, we have to organize a different way to look at things, to map them, to understand what are we mapping and why we are mapping those things and not others. So there is a new selection and the reorientation of our gaze. I think this is fundamental. And then we have to accept a level of rediscussion of some fundamentals, because if we consider that the care or the territory subject are becoming, let's say, new guiding lines, then our project will change in the future. Is changing, but the paradigm shift has not been already made. It's just announced, but we are not entering in it. And I think that this is a crucial moment to try to discuss. I don't see any other way than through public or, let's say, collective discussion to touch those fundamental, foundational parts. And then we can be ready. We can be ready with a reinterpretation of, for example, restoration as a general practice instead as an exceptional one. So when we are regenerating everything, we regenerate the city, and together we regenerate also the ecosystems. So for this, maybe we have the technical elements, but we have to put them together into a frame, and that's why I speak of ontological, let's say, metaphysical question.
Thank you. Ladislav?
Maybe I would like to inform you in short way that not only in this theme of or topic of universality, but also the topic of the overlapping disciplines at our faculty started a few years ago, teach not only the program Architecture and Urbanism, but in the 2008 we started the program Industrial Design, and in 2014 we start teach also landscape architecture, and I think that it is one step to make reaction on this overlapping discipline, and that it is very useful to put the students of the architecture, landscape architecture and designers under one shelter, and it is very important not only for the students but also for the academic staff. And from the next year we start the new program which we combine and put together all the obligatory subject of the architecture and urban design program and the landscape architecture design. And we believe that the obligatory or normal architecture program will be, of course, mostly presented by the students, but we start to offer also this 1 year older program, 6 year studium of the common studium of the architecture, urbanism and landscape architecture.
So that's as a preparation for setting the rules. And Inaki will happily close our panel. May I ask you to do so in response to the question?
I'll try to respond to Manolo. I feel like I tried in the beginning of the morning, but I was not successful. But I agree with what has been said, and Paola was saying changing the gaze. I think being very specific is also think in this change of the gaze is what are we looking at, and maybe stopping looking at our bellies so much as we do. In that sense, who are we serving? And specifically when we are at school, what are the issues that we tackle? And who are we serving when we are learning architecture? Are we serving ourselves? It's just about our own. This is my thing. This is mine. This is my personality, that I use architecture to express my personality. So I think there's an issue in even studio pedagogy to rethink in this. Who are we serving, and what are the issues that we address, and that are not necessarily limited by normative competencies of the profession are driven by the issues that needs to be addressed, and we need to be working in our schools. And even thinking in this very specific education, what we need to introduce, maybe, I don't know, it's what are the other competencies that we need to develop? What are the societal competences that an architect needs to develop in the education? No? What are the economic competencies, sociopolitical competencies, communications competencies, ecological competencies? No? How we thinking in the American system, you have you need to have English, math, physics, and these are like the basics general education competencies. Can we think in our general education competencies are related to ecologies, to economics, to politics, to communications? How we introduce that in the education of a holistic professional? If that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all panelists, Vojtěch, Johan, Paola, Ladislav, and Inaki. Thank you, Kateřina, for being here and reading some of the comments, some of the online comments. So I would like to thank you again. I would like to thank you, audience, for being with us here, and also to the online audience. And now I would kindly ask our guests to leave and two moderators to come, Osamu and Jan. And while they are leaving, I would ask the audience for applauding. So the idea for now is to refresh your thoughts and remembrance and brains of what had happened in past 2 days, starting with Stephen Hall lecture on Wednesday evening, continuing with the topic discussed under the moderator Osamu Okamura named role of the architect, and then continue with the second panel yesterday afternoon when we discussed the overlapping of disciplines in our field. And I think that our panel you have kind of still fresh in your minds. So first I'll ask Osamu to shortly wrap up the main topics and main thoughts from yesterday morning. Thank you, Osamu.
Thank you, Regina. Hello. So it's not really easy not to get influenced by all these discussions that followed my panel. So it's really, we are coming back to the yesterday morning. And I will just try to put down some, I have some notes. It's not really covering everything because otherwise I will have to repeat everything. So just some takeaways. I somehow maybe sometimes a little bit personal. Key role of the architect is to communicate via space, to communicate via form, to communicate via material, communicate via site, communicate via media, and communicate, first of all, with other people. You may recognize something from Jenny there, definitely. Today, it's time to take care more, not only about buildings, but about the space in between them. There is a shift from the question how to make architecture beautiful or how to construct it to the current question how to live together. To me, it almost feels like that the emphasis is changing a little bit from the architecture design to the urban design to nowadays maybe landscape design. We as architects are responsible for why we build and what we build. Architecture has its inevitable ethical dimension that is always political. Don't be afraid to be political. As architects, we should stay specialists in our field, but always being aware of the general, of the widest possible context of our design operation and action. To the most extreme, we should be specialists in being generalists. I don't know if I see Oya somewhere, but she definitely knows where it comes from. The ability to communicate globally and seamlessly today gives us a unique opportunity to exchange our ideas / good practice in an unprecedented manner and speed. Let us use it to the maximum to make less errors and to learn from each other. And let's listen to the nature. We are a nature. Let's find our way back to the nature. Let's re-establish relations with nature, give it a name, give it a language, form, and shape. That was more for the, let's say, initial interventions, and now I will try a little bit to bring together some points from the follow-up discussion. When reaching out to the wider community, the architectural fundamentals, the design, Baukunst, and the beauty come always hand in hand with the emphasis on the economy and with the enlargement of scale and overlapping of disciplines, also proper management and project development. I would be even interested maybe to hear more about the architectural management or architectural project development. And we definitely shouldn't forget about natural systems that are coming into the picture more and more. These are only some of the fields that are growing in importance. Still, for the architects of today and tomorrow, besides the knowledge of the architectural fundamentals and the digital tools, the key characteristics are, and probably will be, the curiosity, ability to learn, and ability to work in a team. There is no doubt that current urgent and pressing global and local issues to be tackled with the help of architecture do require and will require a good portion of courage and a willingness to take multiple risks. And finally, we as architects shouldn't be afraid to be more proactive in reaching out to other disciplines and to our, and not only our, communities. It is our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Osamu. That was serious. And I will ask Honza to wrap up the second panel on the topic of overlapping disciplines.
Thank you, Regina. So, I'll try to be short or brief, better expression. I'd like to connect what was said in my panel to my own experience, because I think this is the easiest way how to touch things that I think were important. I have to say that when we developed this somewhat artificial framework of core and boundaries of our disciplines, I came to the panelists with the proposition that we should explore the boundaries, you know. But through the discussion with them, suddenly the core of the profession appeared. And I have to say, I'm the guy who likes to explore the boundaries. So this was somehow my issue. This is what I do with the students in the studio. You know, we are not ashamed to dip in the fields that we don't know anything about. We like to invite artists, sociologists, and so on. But I have this saying to my students that they shouldn't expect that these other guys, that they answer their questions, and more importantly, that they help them to find their own questions. So they have to always propose their own questions and try to find their own answers. And basically, why we are inviting also these other fields, it's maybe the problem of epistemology, what was mentioned in the Lars's contribution, and also it is partly the question that Jan Ehrlich was posing, which is this finding the point of reference, which is basically the question, how do we orient ourselves? And why do we invite them? It's also this basically problem of clash of epistemologies. This is what we like to do, because they help us to, they drag us out of our own boxes, you know, just to return back, maybe to a little bit different boxes of our own thinking, but still a familiar box of an architect. And I'd like to also mention one more thing that is connected to what Johan was saying, because of course epistemology is important Lars was talking about epistemology of teaching. So of course this gives us a certain point of for orientation. Where do we come from? Where our thinking comes from? What is its basis? And so on. So I think it's very worth to somehow explore the epistemologies of our own fields. But what was super important was what was also Johan saying, and this is this matter of practice, because of course not only the ways of thinking, but also how we use the thinking to do things is extremely important. And I want to give this example of a really small studio in Brno. They don't have even a website. They are young graduates. Actually, it's a collective of graduates from our faculty, and also drop-offs from our faculty. And these drop-offs decided not to be an architect, but to be a carpenter. And this is a collaboration between Carpenter's Workshop and the architectural studio. And they also produce their own designs, you know. And basically, I think we should look at such practices. I think this is the future avant-garde, not the people who produce avant-garde shapes and forms, but people who are able to establish alternative practices, alternative ways of doing things. And you know, their condition is super precarious. Maybe they don't survive. Maybe you know, it's not a good way to work nowadays. But there is a lot of bravery, and I think it's more important than people who went to offices, to establish offices, to draw these iconic and big buildings. You know, this office or studio or whatever collective has only marginal designs. Maybe you wouldn't consider them important, but the way they decided to do things is so appealing to me. And I think this is what we should look at, not on avant-garde forms, but avant-garde practices or alternative practices. And this is extremely important, I think. And this is, this way I come to Ule's and Mia contribution, because in Ule's, how I read Ule's contribution, you know, the way he somehow felt uneasy, but also aware about the differences between him and the students, you know, in this saying that he feels old-fashioned or out of fashion, maybe, or he is afraid of this being out of fashion. So basically, okay, there is certain uncertainty, but also it is a way of feeling respect towards a student. So he, you know, if you feel this gap, this division between you and student, it is also saying that you are on an equal level somehow. And then also what was Mia saying and what Johan was showing is this research what students do after their graduation. And basically, you know, I'm not interested if they decide to be an architect. This is this example of the drop-off of our faculty. He decided not to be an architect, but a carpenter. But I still think that the architectural education was, you know, a great thing to do this decision. And maybe, I believe that most of the students will call themselves architect, but if some of them don't, I think it's still not a failure. If they do something that feels, you know, important to them, and that fulfills their maybe not ambitions, but their attitudes toward the world. And last but not least, there was, of course, Eric and Omvreta. As you maybe can feel, I'm on the other side of the aisle, maybe, because I like to be more, ambivalent, not so sure about myself and what I do. And I don't honor this purity of profession maybe that much in what I do with the students. But still, I think there was a really important thing in what they was saying, and this was the ambition to establish the power of the profession again, because through the precise definition of what we do and what we can offer, it also means that we reclaim our power position in the field among other professions that are also, playing this game of built environment. And if you are able to come with something that is very clear and that you are sure about that you can offer, of course, this makes your position much more strong, and you can play the game with them. And this is, of course, very worth to think of, because being always critical is a good thing, but sometimes it leads, of course, to much ambivalence, which is sometimes difficult to explain. Okay, so maybe I was too long, sorry for that, but this is the wrap-up of my panel. Thank you very much.
And it's a difficult situation for me to wrap up the panel which just finished, but I think that none of the panelists question the universality of architectural education. If we could broaden the universality even more, I felt that we are for it. And also what was important was actually directing our gaze into the future with the tools we have now and with the tools which are coming, and with the future being considered throughout today's eyes. I have no more notes here, or I have plenty of them, but I think this is just enough to wrap up what you have just heard. So thank you very much for your attention, for this short contribution, and I'd like to invite Irena and give her the floor.
Thank you, Regina. Before we finish this panel, because it's the last panel of the whole conference, Dalibor told me he would like to say a few words, and maybe even Oya or Ladislav, I don't know. So Dalibor, would you like to take the floor? And I'll be back with you in a moment.
Thank you, Irena, and thank you, our dear moderators, for the great job you did. Well, we all feel that we are coming to the end of the conference. In the afternoon, we'll have the business part of our meeting, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank all who helped prepare this conference, despite all the pandemic problems and things like that. And if you allow me, I'll read it, because there's always a danger I forget someone. First, I would like to thank the EAAE Council with President Oya Atalay Frank and Vice President Ilaria Valente for giving us the opportunity to organize this event here in Prague, and also to Andrea Kleinert and Celine, which are not here or are somewhere invisible, creating the PowerPoints for the afternoon. I would also like to thank Mia, who organized the previous conference, and she was always here for me and shared the valuable experience from the last EAAE conference in Zagreb. So it was a great help for us. Thank you very much for that. I would like to thank Irena. our Vice Dean for Foreign Affairs. It is said on the webpage that I'm the head of the organization team, but if I'm the head, she's the neck. She has endless energy, and she knows how to step in at the right moment and point out something very important which we have completely forgotten about. So thank you for that. Jan Tesař is a guy you probably have not seen. He's kind of a man behind the scenes. He's the Vice Dean for Public Relations, and things are just being done without you actually knowing how did that happen. One day the foyer is empty, and second day it's full of exhibitions. So thank you, Jan, and also his right hand, Romana. I would like to thank Jana Totová, which is the financial director of our faculty, for keeping things kind of in order. I would like to thank my core team, which is Kateřina Rotová and Kristýna Sedlaříková. You probably met them throughout the conference. Kateřina, there's so many things that Kateřina took care of that I don't even have time to name them, and some of them I don't even know. They just kind of happened by themselves without me taking care of them. And Kristýna, she just managed countless emails, phone calls with just a stoic calm, and she always stayed on top of things. And to be honest, without these two ladies, we would not be here. It would just not happen. And I would also like to thank this young, wonderful man. So he's a son of Kateřina, in case you didn't notice. And his hairstyle, I would like to have that. So thank you for helping us with the microphone. I would like to thank Kateřina Dolejšová. She's the graphic designer, and she designed this great visual identity of this conference. I'd like to thank Veronika. I think I see her there behind the scenes, from Guarant, for respecting the complicated personality of an architect. I think she's not used to dealing with architects. And we have such a quality that on one hand we like to plan things in advance, but on the other hand we constantly improve them and change them at last minute. So she kind of dealt with that very professionally. Thank you. I would like to thank Audiolight. That's all these men in black you see around. Honestly, I still don't understand how you connected all those cables and that these things work. I have no idea how you did it, but there was no problem and it was great, and it's because of you that everything went very smoothly. I would like to thank our faculty IT and all the people in the faculty personnel who took care of us. That was, I would say, the form, and now the topic. I would like to thank Ladislav Lábus, because he is the one who created the topic of the conference, and I believe that the discussion showed that although the topic actually originated 3 years ago, it's becoming more and more relevant. I would like to thank members of the program committee, Jan Jehlík, Michal, Kohout, Ivan Plicka, and Jiří Plos, for helping us evolve the topic. It's been a constant work for around a year, and also for representing our faculty at the panels. I would like to thank Stephen Hall again, but I think he's not watching. I would like to thank Martin Kropáč, who is our faculty colleague and cooperating architect with Stephen Hall, and he helped really very much to arrange the lecture, so thanks for that. I already did that, thank you, but I still would like to thank Osamu, Jan and Regina, the rectors and deans of 3 Czech schools of architecture. It's always difficult to accept a different topic of someone else, but they did that and helped us develop it very much, and they did a wonderful job guiding us throughout the conference. It's been a hard work, and they are really well prepared, and everyone is saying it's been great, so thank you very much, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last occasion. And of course the keynote speakers and panel members for the wonderful and inspiring lectures and provocations, and sometimes coming very often from a large distance to be here with us. I would like to thank our students for watching the conference, but also for taking the active role. Vojtěch Ruderfer, who organized the workshop prior to the conference and who presented the student voice, so thank you. And I'm coming to an end, sorry for that, but I think it's important to say. I would also like to mention 2 former council members. That's kind of my personal note. Zdeněk Zavřel, the former dean of the faculty, who introduced me to EAAE and to this wonderful community. Thanks. And Hugo Dvořák, you know what that's for. And I would like to thank Velux, maybe Oya will talk about that, but for supporting the conference. Thanks to Velux, we can have all these great speakers and moderators. And mostly important, at the end, I'd like to thank you, our friends and colleagues, that you either came here to Prague and shared your thoughts and your time with us, and also those who were not able to be here and who stayed with us online. Actually, that's why we all do this event, and I hope we'll see you here again. Thanks, and I will pass over the word to our Dean, Ladislav Lábus.
Thank you very much, and I would like really thanks also to all who help us, who participate, who was a panelist, and I will be generalist in this thanking, and I don't say the name, maybe only one name. I thank to Oya, and I thank all the EAAE that we have possibility to make in Prague this annual conference, and I am very glad that there was so many people in the contact way of participant, and I also like that there was so many people on the online. We don't suppose that there will be, I think, about 100 people which are looking for us on online. Yeah. So I can say only that goodbye, and I am very glad if on the next annual conference in Madrid, I hope that they will have better conditions than in Prague. It will be in next year and not in the 23. And I hope that there will be opposite relation of the people online and in the contact way. And I hope that that all this pandemic, which are so in the last 2 years, so influenced our students, our schools, our lives, that will be over us. Yeah. So in Madrid, maybe we have after the 5th vaccination, so I think there will be 200 people. Goodbye.
And now, Oya, the floor is yours.
Yes, I also thank everybody. I'm not going to name, it's impossible to name all. Dalibor did a fantastic job. It was a lot of work, we know that, and it was great. Thank you all. Thank you very much for this incredible energy you have brought. Few words. We asked about the position of the architect, individual, what kind of person. There was the question of the humbleness, how that contradicts with what are the expectations. I'd like to say there are 2 words connected to that. Humility. Humility is a condition, and that is something that we have to have. It's a respect to the challenges we have, the work we have to do. as professionals, as teachers, educators, or researchers, but also as students. So we have to be humble in order to respect and open and see our challenges and deal with them. But we should be sharp-minded. We should have a strong position when we try to bring our contribution. We should be self-aware of that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be self-critical. And that's why we are here. We are here to exchange ideas. We are here to listen to different understandings on other positions. We don't have to agree with them, but this is the moment to reflect on them. So it's all too single of us to decide what we take along. And I really hope that we are all in the position to make the best out of it. The boundaries are there. That allows us to work, define our positions, but they're also there that we can open them up and change them. So I thank you very much. I'm looking forward to see you all in Madrid. Many of you also online who was with us. We are going to meet at 14:30 for the General Assembly. A big applause for everybody who participated.